Hey listener, welcome to DoubleDM's episode on non-player character creation. In this episode, we will discuss creating non-player characters better, how to make them feel alive, why and how you create NPC templates and categories that will help you in creating NPCs on the fly, and we discuss throwaway NPCs and why your players always attach to that NPC instead of the believable NPC you wrote in prep. So sit back and let's chat about making your TTRPGs better. Oh, by the way, before we can start into the episode, that last line you just heard, let's chat about making your TTRPGs better. That was made or thought about by Allie from Dice Drop Evolution, who's open for branding and logo work and has created our new Twitter profile and YouTube channel banners for us. So please, if you want to improve your branding work with awesome graphics, hit up Allie. I will put some links for that into the description. Do it if you can. It's really freaking worth it. Okay, and one last thing before I let you off into your episode, guys. We have an announcement to make. DoubleDM, starting with episode 67, will release on Mondays now. That means episode 67 will not release on May 15, but May 16. So don't worry if you don't see an episode in your Sunday feeds. The episode will drop on Monday mornings for the US crowd and will be completely the same as every other DoubleDM episode has been before. There's no changes to the format, there's just changes to the editing schedules, and it allows us to get those episodes out more quickly. It allows us to put them at a better convenient time to upload. I don't know what that means for us. Maybe it increases listens, maybe it decreases listens. Please stay with us if you're listening to this. The episode is not gonna change anything just because it releases on Monday. Okay, I think I talked enough already, so now please sit back and let's chat about making your NPCs better. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of DoubleDM, a TTRPG talk. Oh, I don't know why I did that, but I feel like I had to.
We're weird like that. Hello guys.
I am, as always, your host, Emil. I am here with Niels.
Hello.
Niels, how are you doing?
Yeah, I can't complain. I nearly finished my math homework for next week already, because it's fucking easy this week compared to last week. But yeah, that's amazing. So I can enjoy the weather, as it is beautiful today.
I cannot enjoy the weather. I have to do math homework. Well, I had to. Now I am in the process of more or less getting ready. Right, we're recording. But I'm getting ready to go to my weekly TTRPG session in a bit. But yeah, I had to do a lot of math homework before that, and it's not fun. Advanced geometry on a university level is something that I can not recommend to anybody.
Yeah, my
really. No one enjoys that. Because imagine a cone, okay? A normal cone.
Yeah.
Like you know in math, right? Round thing at the bottom, tip at the top, and then weird shapes. Now, take a plane. Not an airplane, but a plane.
Yeah.
Right? A mathematical plane.
Yeah.
And slide it into this cone at whatever angle you want.
Oh, no.
Okay? Okay?
No. Yeah.
Okay. The intersection of that cone and that plane, those things are interesting to us in geometry, in hypergeometry. It's not hypergeometry, that comes later. That's the worst part about it. I still get to do hypergeometry. But right now it's just this normal geometry with cones and planes. But now you intersect those. And now when you look at just a picture from the front of this image of a cone dissected by or intersected by a plane, you can draw two circles inside the cone that basically are able... And now comes the best part. Now give you a parameter that is used to define what type of intersection you have. Either it's an ellipsis, a parabola. So yeah.
Yeah, I got a bit of an easier time there. I have to calculate the determinants of matrices. That's just a lot of finger work, but pretty easy. So yeah, my condolences on that.
I'm gonna survive it. I think I have a good baseline for this because it's my last course I have to do before I get my bachelor's degree. So I have enough time to focus on this course to actually do it right and not just, okay, I have to do this somehow. I have time to focus on the stuff, and it's actually pretty interesting to work with this sort of stuff, because it's kind of cool to just see how different 3 or 4 right? The problem is that we also go higher dimensions than 3 dimensions, 4, 5, 6 dimensions. How these shapes and structures are intersecting each other, affecting each other, and working together with each other to create the things we knew. Watch out, Niels, watch out.
Yeah.
I have something for you.
Oh,
because something I learned 10 years later after I learned it, how to first define the thing is how it's actually defined. So what's the right angle? Give me the definition for a right angle.
Right out of at the top of my head, as I learned in school with triangles and shit, right angle would be 90 degrees angle or pi or half pi.
That is what everyone learns, right?
Yeah. Oh,
but
no.
It's completely, it's not false, but it's not the actual definition of a right angle.
It's not complete?
At least it's one of them.
Oh no.
The actual definition of a right angle is if you have 2 lines intersecting each other and the angles in which they are intersecting each other, right? Because if 2 lines intersect each other, you can draw 4 angles.
Yeah.
If all of those 4 angles have the same size, they are all right angles. That's the definition of a right angle.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the degrees.
Okay,
The degrees is just the conclusion of every one of these 4 has to have the same amount of degrees. And because the circle is 360 degrees, which is set, 360 divided by 4 is 90. So that's why right angles are 90 degrees. They are not right angles because they are 90 degrees. They are 90 degrees because they are right angles.
I see. Okay.
It took me 10 years to actually get to learn that fact about right angles.
Yeah, and let me guess, in higher dimensions, this whole 90 degrees half pi shit gets fucked up.
I don't know actually yet, but it's just when we had to calculate that there was only one line intersecting another line at 90 degrees angle, we had to do that through the right angles. And that's where I realized, wait, I can't, because the definition of a right angle is 90 degrees. I thought I could just say, well, we have a right angle, it's 90 degrees, so we know that this line intersects at 90 degrees. But then I learned, that doesn't work. Because the 90 degrees is not a fact I am allowed to use. I'm allowed to use the fact that every other angle has the same size as this angle, and therefore it has to be 90 degrees. But that's not a fact I can use. I need to prove that fact, that extra step further.
Yeah.
Which is the most mindfuckery thing. So, TTRPGs.
TTRPGs, yes.
Did you have any sessions this week?
I did not, but I have some coming up.
Yeah, I had one on Tuesday.
Tell me about it.
It was Tyranny of Dragons. So we had our Tyranny of Dragons campaign. And this campaign was on hiatus for nearly a year, or just a year at this point. So it was a big recap session. I recapped with my players the whole events of the whole campaign before that. Then my players tied up some loose ends in Waterdeep. Just some, okay, let's talk to this wizard, let's talk to this thief we met, let's talk to this priest, let's go to the library, let's find out this stuff. And then was, okay, what do we do now? And then one of the players who changed characters shortly before we stopped playing, and therefore I kind of made it like, okay, you switched your character for this session first. It's weird, but just imagine that this character is a new character since this session. And then I said, okay, we bring you in very easily through this. You know the character, you know the other players through other backstory stuff. They already knew him or them. And you need to frame someone for murder.
Okay.
It's not solve a murder. It's find someone they can frame for a murder.
Okay.
Now, before anyone starts spurting, this is chaotic evil shit and all of that stuff, it's actually not, because they need to frame someone from the cult for murder.
I see. Yeah.
They need to, there was a murder, and they need to pin it on someone that is not innocent. Because if it was an innocent person, I would have said, nope, stop that shit. I don't want that in my campaign. Yeah, my players are now trying to pin someone for murder of a crown prince of a different country, so war doesn't break out while the cult is running havoc on the Sword Coast.
And that's and that is why context is important. Because without the whole crown prince thing, this would be some weird, chaotic, crazy shit. But with the context context, it makes sense.
It kind of But we also have sessions coming up together. We have one session coming up together. Do you also have other sessions coming up?
Yes, on Sunday.
Okay.
Sunday evening, I'm playing Curse of Strahd campaign again.
Your campaign or in the campaign you're playing?
Where I'm playing in.
Okay. Let's talk about Vampire. I am excited to play that again. We haven't played for quite some time because of personal reasons for other players, but we are getting back into it. Our group, I don't know, I can't pronounce the term Vampire uses for a group. Sorry everyone that likes Vampire. I am still new to this system and I haven't learned all the words you use for your things, but it's a lovely system. It's a great system, and Niels, how are you feeling about that game? How are you feeling about the situation you're in? How are you feeling about your character? And
first of all, I would say I'm excited to see where all of this is going, because it's the first time playing a TTRPG like this that is not a classical power fantasy per se. So sometimes I am lost and don't know what to do in-game, but that's kind of part of the challenge for me to widen my range of games that I want to play, can play, and whatever. And that's what I want to do. I want to learn what I can do in those situations. And I think the group we are playing with is pretty awesome for that, actually. And I'm excited to do that. And what my character feels is a whole different thing. He just thinks, why is it our deal? I mean, we are kind of affected, but he personally isn't. If I remember correctly, at least. So he has some conflicts because...
I wouldn't say that. He's kind of affected. Yeah. Everyone is kind of affected.
Kind of, but not to the personal extent as some of the other characters are. But he's kind of, why is it, or is it our thing to solve? And what can we do if it is our thing to solve? He's a bit lost, but looking for some guidance and a clear path to where he is going, wherever that may be. I think that would be the best description of the feelings of myself and my character in this group or in this game.
Okay.
Yeah. How are you feeling about this? Are you excited?
Of course I'm excited. It's my game. No, I'm looking forward to what you're gonna do. I'm looking forward how you approach the next challenges that are in your way. I'm excited to see how you guys are gonna interact with the next people you meet and what you're gonna do with the information you get. There's a lot of interesting stuff that I want to see happen, or not that I want to see a specific thing happen, but I want to see what happens when I present you with the stuff that I have.
Then let's see where all of this is going tomorrow, right? All right. That would be it for me. I don't have anything majorly or anything specific.
If that's it for you, then that's it for me as well. So we can dive into the actual episode. We will hear you all after a short mid-roll. Hey everyone, welcome to your scheduled mid-roll. If you have been enjoying DoubleDM either as a first-time listener or month-long fan, thank you for listening. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, sitting back and philosophizing about tabletop role-playing and game mastering and all other nonsense we throw in there. If you want to help us out though, there are a few easy ways you can help out the show. Leave a review or rating on the platform you are listening on right now. It's often just a few clicks and types away, or even better, tell a friend about us. Spread the word about our show and how it has helped you or might help someone running their games. If you've listened to our episode on character creation or our episode on villains and think, hey, this would be a good fit for my friend that has some questions on that, send them our episode. Maybe they like it. Maybe they will love it and become our new fan and you have someone to discuss the show with. Trust me, creative dialogue is one of the best things you can do. It's why we do this. Okay, anyway, enough of me. If you are another TTRPG creator and want your product, show or project featured on the DoubleDM podcast right here at this point in time in the episodes, contact us on Twitter. We have paid advertisement slots as well as promo swap spots open for creators. Okay. That was the mid-roll, everyone. Thanks. Let's jump right back into the show.
And with that, welcome back to the episode. We are talking about creating NPCs. And as usual, we want to know what we are talking about first and more or less define it. So Emil, please help me with that. What is an NPC?
An NPC is, per definition, a non-player character. In a video game, that is everyone that is not controlled by the person holding the controller or with their hands on keyboard and mouse. In a TTRPG sense, that is every character that is controlled by the dungeon master, game master, storyteller, referee, or whatever you want to call it. Even more precisely in games that are, for example, GM-less, any character that is not the player characters. The players control a set number of characters, which could be considered your main cast, and NPCs are everyone supporting the story of that main cast. That does not mean that an NPC has to be a humanoid with intelligence necessarily. They can also be any animal you have, even trees you have, any life form, anything that can be considered inside the game as having a conscience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Anything that has the crucial word of all those three words we use for NPC character. Everything that has a character and is not played by players is a non-player character. So everything that, since we're on a topic of, since we're DoubleDM, we're talking about mostly D&D, but not only D&D, anything that is played by the dungeon master of your games is an NPC. Or something, some other people call it DMPC, but there's a crucial thing that some people, when they say DMPC, mean a player character played by a DM.
Yeah,
but an NPC is also a DMPC, because the DM is also a player, per definition of D&D.
Yeah.
On the first page, it's one of the players has to be the dungeon master. So we're talking about NPCs. DMPCs are something different, but actually they're not.
They are part of the NPC thing. Well, every DMPC would be an NPC, but not every NPC is a DMPC.
Oh, no, I believe both of the terms are equal to each other. But other people just started using the NPC because there was no better term for the DM creating a character with the players and playing a character in the party.
Okay.
But every character is a DMPC necessarily. As I said, we use the word NPC because we mean every character that the DM plays. Even if they play a DMPC, that's an NPC.
Okay.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's it. That's the episode, everyone. Let's get home.
Goodbye. No, obviously not. But, NPCs are used for mostly specific things. But what could NPCs be used for? What is an NPC for?
Well, an NPC is for me as the DM, it's a way to showcase my world and the game and everything I want to portray to my players, because they are the main way that I can portray things to my players, because they are for the players, something the players can use to connect to the world. I think that NPCs are more or less the window to your worlds. So if you create an NPC, think about what they show to the players and what you can use them to show the players, or what you can use them for to show to the players. Because if you take out NPCs from the game, the only thing that's left is the player characters engaging with an empty, characterless world. That can still be interesting for the record. Fun campaign idea, maybe. Everyone that has a conscience is gone except the player characters. Could be fun. But then again, every monster, every creature, every antagonist has also a conscience.
Yeah, I think in general, you could say that NPCs are tools that you can use to connect your players to the world or influence the players by the world.
I think they are the main lever you can use to influence your players. They're not the only one, but they are the main one you can use. And it's the one that I believe is the one you need to get right the most. I'm not saying that if you don't get an NPC right, your game is bad or anything. But if your NPCs are good, you have a very, very powerful tool to play with. And even if your NPCs are only, let's call it middle class, even though I believe there is nothing like middle class, you're all good at creating NPCs the way you create them. But they are the main way to influence your players. So I would say hone your NPC skills whenever you can, because they are the main lever that can elevate your game.
Yeah, it's a universal tool to interact with your players. So if you got that down, a big thing in your toolbox that you can and will use often, but it gets easier with the time to create better, more enticing, more interesting, or better fit NPCs. And that's something we will probably talk about today.
Yeah. So after over 5 minutes of this philosophizing, let's do more philosophizing.
Hell yeah.
Niels, when we talked about what we want to talk about in this episode, before this episode, so we get on the same page of everything, you mentioned the term NPC categories. And I want you to define that term for me and for the listeners at home and tell us what that is all about for you.
When I create NPCs, I try to think of them in categories to save some time pairing them, because creating and preparing NPCs can be a lot of time. It can take a lot of time.
Yeah.
So I try to think of basically 4 main categories for me, which would be the combatants that need complete stat blocks and mechanics that go with this NPC. Like, for example, your classical monster that you can find in monster manuals or whatever. You know where to find your enemies. Then the main or reoccurring NPCs, those are the ones that the party will interact with the most in any way, shape, or form. May it be your big bad evil guy or any sort of ally or anything that the party interacts with a lot. That is some NPCs that you need to put more time in because they need some depth, they need some flavor.
I would say that they will have to put more time into these NPCs just through the nature of the game, since they will reoccur.
Exactly. Then I put one category in the one-offs, or they are once or twice, but are important for some story moments, or are therefore important story moments. They need some depth, but not as much as the main reoccurring ones. And then we have your extras. Those are just there to add flavor or color to your world. They are just there to fill the space.
Yeah.
That does not mean, or I don't mean that any NPC can't be in multiple categories at once or can change categories. But when you create them, or when I create them, I usually try to not per se stick to those categories, but think about them when I create them to see how much time I should or have to put into them.
Yeah, I feel especially the last category, these background NPCs, right? That's a good term for them. Background NPCs. They are there to fill the world. They are there to be described as part of the background, right? If I describe a marketplace scene and I describe, you see a group of tieflings walking along the stands, buying a bit of grapes, I don't know. Those are background NPCs. I don't have anything else on these tieflings. I just want to tell my players that there are tieflings in this town and that this create the feeling of this marketplace being filled with all different kinds of lineages and cultures and heritages and all of that stuff. So those are background NPCs. But obviously, everyone can be used to color in your world, right? Every NPC you create can be a tiefling. Every major NPC can be a tiefling of different colors and abilities and all of that stuff. And that allows you then to also color in your world with that. So this army general is a tiefling now. That could mean that, for example, in a world that has a lot of fear of devils, still tieflings are still on the side of those against the devils. Some people say tieflings are devils, but apparently others don't think that, or this army general work their way through the chain of command, even though of their heritage. So, right, you have every NPC able to color in your background, but some are just there for that. That's their main purpose, and others do that passively already because of who they are.
Yeah, and I think we dove a bit into how to create NPCs with exactly your answer right there. Because one of the first things I try to think about when I create NPCs is what is the purpose of that NPC? Why is it where it is? It is hugely important, at least from my point of view, to know why did I put exactly this NPC there? Why is it not John or Jane Doe?
Yeah.
That is something that you need to keep in mind to make them relevant for your game, not for the story per se, but for the game itself.
So we talked about these categories now, and I think they're a good thing that help you later on get to know your NPCs a little better, even because you can think about this NPC is there to color in the world, so they are just some person. I do not need a name. I do not need this. Okay, there are a reoccurring NPC once or twice, and players will speak to them. They definitely need a name. I forget that anyway. Because I am dumb, I don't know, but I still forget the names sometimes. This is a major NPC, so I need to spend as much time as I can on this NPC because I need to develop them, they need to change, they need to reflect the world, they need to have this, and this. Okay, cool. But okay, we didn't talk about creating an NPC yet. We didn't talk about what steps we go through, what things we do, and how we create our NPCs. So Niels, please, when you need to create an NPC. You are in your prep right now, you're not in a session or something, and you think, I need an NPC for whatever reason. Walk me through the first step of that. You have realized you need an NPC. What is the next step you do for that NPC?
The next step is figuring out what the purpose of that NPC that I need is. Usually that kind of answers itself already, because if you feel the need to insert an NPC, you usually already have the purpose for that.
Yeah.
But it is not a given that you have the purpose if you just feel the need for that.
And even if the purpose is given, I would still advise you to write it down.
Yeah.
This NPC is for giving my players information. And if you have that, figure out the information. Not necessarily before to create the rest of the NPC, because that can still be a thing that you do later, but figure out the information you want your players to have when your NPC has the purpose of giving your players information, because you need that to create the purpose, or that is the purpose of that NPC.
Exactly. And then I usually think about two other things that, if they interact with NPCs, would be how do they look, some appearances, how they behave, how they feel, how they move. In general, a physical description, basically, and a name. I need something that I can tell my players, this is the name of that NPC, so they can address that NPC directly without a doubt. Not just person that looked like X. That's not a precise way for me to know which NPC they are talking to.
Yeah, I am terrible at names. I don't create the name for an NPC at the beginning. I sometimes do, I sometimes don't, but sometimes I don't have a name and I realize, shit, I need a name for this NPC I created because, I don't have a name, but I have 15 different pages of lore for this NPC. I don't know how that works for me, but it kind of does. Create a name. Make something that makes it easy for you to address this character. But it doesn't have to be just a name. It can also be a title. It can be something that they achieved. The hero of, or the slayer of the beast, or whatever.
Some sort of nameplate.
Yeah, but you can create all of that. When I create, for example, for Titan's Core, when I created a few people that you talk to, I created names and titles for these people because it makes it easy for me to address them. And this is not a spoiler for Titan's Core because this is just thought of from my head, the High Prefect Abraham whatever. That is a title and name I can address this character with throughout my prep now. If you use a digital prep tool like OneNote or whatever other notebook, you can probably link to the NPC description in later parts of your notes, once again with the name and a hyperlink. So creating that name allows you to not only get to know the character, because it makes it easy to basically save the name in your brain for the NPC you have if you are creating. You're connecting that together.
Yeah.
And that connection is strong because later when you reference that NPC, you recall that information. And even better, sometimes you can actually link to the information you have.
Exactly.
So that is definitely a next good step. Yeah.
With these three things, you basically have created a base for your NPC, which you then can build up upon, however deep you want to go.
Yeah, I feel those is a very good baseline in creating the NPC, having the purpose, having a way to address them, and making them at least that little bit of person, giving them the word character actually a character. And that means a little bit personality, a little bit description, a little bit to make them feel tangible to your players, right? A name isn't tangible, but a description and a person talking is tangible to them. Going back to voices, we talked about that, how to create a voice, but right, it's kind of the same here. You don't need to create a voice, but when you have a voice, it makes the character tangible for your players. And making the character tangible is the baseline for creating a character. You need to have a purpose, a name, and a tangibility for your character.
Yeah.
And those are the bases.
And I think making your NPCs characters and not just amorphous, colorless blobs with a nameplate on it just makes it more comfortable for the player characters to interact with them. Because they have something that they can see, more or less.
Yeah. I think these three things are something you will need for every NPC that is not just a background NPC. I'm just going to call them background NPCs now, because those characters are the ones that are meant to be interacted with.
Yeah.
If a background NPC is not to be interacted with, you don't need a name. You just need the description. You don't even need a personality. You just need a short description. Or you just need, they are a tiefling, or they are an ASMR, or whatever, or an Arakocra, or whatever. And that is something you have. And now you have this to throw together an NPC NPC really, really quickly. You know which steps you need to take to create an NPC your players can interact with. You create a name, get the purpose, your players say, okay, we want someone, this will be more convoluted than play and be different than play, but this is simplified. Your players will tell you, okay, we need an NPC that tells us this information.
Yeah.
That is the purpose. Boom, you have the purpose. Then you create a name. You can do any name you want. You can create a name that fits or not. And for names, the biggest advice I have that I never follow myself is create name lists. If you have if you're in a big city and you know your players are going to talk to a lot of different people, to blacksmith, carpenters, leather workers, arrow makers, and all of that, shopping trips especially, create a name list of 20 first names and 20 last names and just connect them together yourself.
Yeah.
Your players will never know that you just created so many NPC names on the fly by just having a list of the names written down next to you.
Yeah.
And then you can cater that list. You can make that list fit.
Yeah, and then one quick tip regarding that, cross the names out you used and write them together, because then will not be two NPCs with the same name.
Don't cross out the names. Please don't, people, because this is just giving you more work. Yeah, yes, you can cross out the names, especially if you write full names. If I write Fritz, Gerald, Jeremy, last name, whatever, then yes, never create that name again. But I would never advise you to cross out the name Fritz on your name list. Never. Because you write down the most common names in the area you have and just put everyone with those names.
Yeah, I meant cross out that name combination.
Yeah, write it next to the list, so that allows you to know, okay, I created this character already, because that will create confusion.
Or make some sort of note at Fritz and the surname that you have used that combination before.
Yeah.
In some way, mark it, cross it out in your mind or whatever. Because if you have Fritz A and another Fritz A, this will lead to confusion because you have the same character twice, basically, at least from the nameplate.
Most of the times you will do this for minor NPCs anyway, so your players won't remember them anyway if you do it like 5-6 sessions later. But still, yeah, keep in mind that you have a character with that name already, but never cross out the most common names, because one of the big things that, in my opinion, the Dark Eye does for world building and creating NPCs is it gives you, for every region you're in on the continent that it just has in his world, the 15 most common names for men and women.
Okay, that's awesome.
And it literally just says, these are the 15 most common names, use them. And that allows you to create a lot of character names on the fly. And that is a godsend for me.
Oh yeah.
And then the description. That is the thing that is probably the hardest step to do, because it may take the longest, right? The names can be long, can be hard, but it's not that much of an effort to create the name. It's just that your brain blanks. But a description and personality and character, that may create problems. But for that, we have advice for you. Create templates. Create yourself templates. If you want to create NPCs on the fly quick, especially these minor NPCs, for these, that works perfect. Create a template and make these templates whenever you feel like you can make one, right? Do them as extra part of your prep at the beginning of your campaigns, especially if your players are entering a town. You know, okay, they will go shopping. So, okay, I will just create a shop owner template. And then you write down a few points for the shop owners. Descriptions, for personalities, for maybe you describe how well connected, right? You just write a few notes for these. And then you don't have to use every single of these templates, but just write down 10, 20, maybe 30 different bullet points for this template and pull from that for your NPC. Just as with the name list. Yeah. Create a template, all shop owners, then you can create this template. For example, for shop owners, all shop owners in this town do haggle. Boom. That is something you can create for every shop owner now. You can also write does haggle and then just pick for those that you want to haggle, that they can haggle with the players, right? Create a template, make it very easy for you. Create those templates early on and use them as often as you can. Expand them if you can as well. Change them if your players change regions. And that makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and then when you have this base with appearances, purpose, and name, what are the next steps that you usually take?
Well, if it's for a minor NPC, like a shop owner or someone that is really just once or twice appearing, that's it. Because they don't serve a bigger purpose than my players interact with them twice. That's kind of their overarching purpose as a category. But if we get higher than that, these characters should feel special. They should feel different. They should feel unique. And I think the best thing you can do to make a character feel unique often we slip into this. NPCs are just still humanoids or still playable races or whatever, but they're also still monsters, right? A minor monster just needs the few things you have, and then obviously the step block if your players fight. But we can get to step blocks later. For now, it's just creating the NPC that is a connection to your players, a way to interact with your players. But for everything that is a little bit majorly, create something unique about them. Make this shop owner have, I don't know, something that makes them very unique. They are scarred. They were in battle before. They are a veteran and now have taken up a shop. That makes them unique, standing out from all other shop owners now. That is a unique trait. That is a unique quirk. That is something that just expands the character over the template.
Yeah, but it just doesn't have to be just physical in appearance. It can be a specific way they talk. Coming back to voices, you can create a special voice just for that character. Or once your characters, coming back to the monster part of NPCs, once your character has fought like a lot of gnolls, for example, or whatever monster you can think of, add some spice to it, but keep the base the same, more or less. This makes them more memorable, a special one.
Yeah, right. Give them a quirk. Maybe it doesn't even have to be a stat block thing, but it can also be that they always go for the spellcaster first.
Yeah.
Can be a tactic. Can be the way they spice up combat, whatever, right? But make them unique in a very specific way that you deem appropriate for this character. It can be physical, it can be in the voice, it can be in the information they present, right? They can be the only one that can, for a magic item shopkeeper, they are the only ones that are able to forge, I don't know, blades from this very serious star metal the players found. Boom.
Yeah.
Instantly makes them major. Instantly makes your players want to connect with this NPC more because they're special all of a sudden. And
and some things that I like to add to those major NPCs that will become sooner or later, through whatever reason, part of the story itself. Give them some personality, something about their person that just shows later in any sort of conversation that happens, something that just friends would reveal to each other, some desires, some secrets, some strength and some weaknesses, some fears. Then create ties with the world. Give them maybe some allies or enemies that your players might want to deal with because you are friends now, or something like that. Give them a goal they want to achieve in their current time. And just ways that the character is intertwined with the world around them. In a similar way, the player characters are intertwined, but not to that degree because it's still, in quotation marks, just an NPC and not the main focus of the story.
Yeah.
But it will be a useful and huge tool in that story, so you will need to add some depth to it.
And one of the things DMs, going back to the beginning where we talked about the NPCs and what some people say a DMPC is, and that a DMPC is bad. That's often the things you hear. Do not think that when you create a character, a major character, that they are instantly, just because you create a lot for them and love this character, because yes, I also love some of my NPCs I create. I enjoy them so much that I sometimes just make them play a character stat blocks because I want to make them a character sheet because I want to play them as characters myself at some point in a game or a one shot or whatever. But do not think that when you create a major NPC or a big NPC that has a very deep lore, that has a lot of cool features and is very cool and intricate and interesting, do not think that you're stealing your player's spotlight just because you created that character. That is still something way different, because there's a difference between having a cool character that is sometimes cool and helping and still just supporting the party story instead of telling their own story the party has to experience. You can have a very cool, strong NPC help the players in the dragon combat by doing the cool thing, but not outright taking the spotlight entirely. The NPC is still allowed to get the killing blow sometimes, but be wary that you do not do this because you want the character to feel cool, but just because the game and the circumstances called for this to happen. Players will know. Everyone knows when the DM has an NPC that they want to be the hero of the game, of the story. That's something players can feel.
Yeah.
And they always will feel that. But just because you have a cool NPC doesn't mean that your players will feel that this NPC is gonna be the hero of the story. There's a difference there. They know that you create a cool NPC because the story calls for this cool NPC to be a supporting character for the players. So just don't think about it too much that you're stealing your player's spotlight. Just be wary of if you ever start thinking about, okay, I want my cool NPC to do this stuff, because then you slip into, I want my NPC to do the cool stuff instead of my players. Not they happen to do the cool cool stuff because it just so happens by the game, by what the game and circumstances and story called for. Because sometimes that happens without you even knowing that your NPC gets the finishing blow. And your players won't mind if that happens because they know that it happened through the circumstances of the game and not through you wanting to force it.
Yeah, just play the game as you want and how it feels comfortable for everyone.
Yeah. I also have another tip I talked about this tip in the Voices episodes. I just want to bring it up again. Create a quote for your characters, or 2 or 3. Or if you want to get inspired for your character, take movie, game, book quotes from your favorite characters there and create from that. Because quotes, not just that they give you a way to do the voice for your character, they give you the personality of your character, because there's so much personality in how people talk and how people express themselves that you need to think about how your character talks. And the quote gives you that. The quote gives you so much about the personality and so much about this character's way of thinking as well. It allows you to get an image of their conscience if you write down the quote of what they think and how they react to stuff.
Yeah, and I feel like if you have all of this down, you made your NPC cool, but not stealing the spotlight cool, and have everything else down. How can you convey this feeling to your players? How can you make an NPC feel more alive?
An NPC more alive. Make them feel normal, for whatever that means in the game sense, right? A fantasy world isn't normal. Dragons aren't real. But make them feel not just idealized, stylized versions of something. People are intricate. People are complex in the real world, and they should be, especially if they're a major NPC, they should feel complicated in the game as well. That will make them feel alive. Having someone that is complicated, someone that has a lot of layers to them, will feel alive, because that's how people are alive. Everyone has stuff to deal with, and your NPCs aren't devoid from that. They still have their own things to deal with. They have purposes in the world, not just for the game, but in the world. They have work. They need to make coin, show struggles they have at home with their kids, with their wife, with their husband, with their boss, with whatever. That can make them feel a lot more alive than you think. Sometimes showcasing the struggle, because sometimes we slip into this, this character is an idealized version of something and they have no trouble at all. Yeah, there's a missing layer there all of a sudden, and that is felt.
Yeah, in general, I think giving your NPCs a deeper personality regarding their lore, you could say, helps me, or helps my players in most cases.
Yeah.
If I think about the history of that major NPC, that's some work that I won't do for one-offs or shop owners, but for the big bad or whatever, I consider how they got to the point where they are now interacting with the party. Because your past experiences form the way you interact with the future ones. And given that this might influence or will influence the way they act, or the way they were raised, may interact with the way they are now talking to a specific group. If you were raised by a noble, you would know how to talk to a noble. If you might want to talk properly to that or not is coded in the history or the background of that certain NPC. And that's something to consider to make them more complex, to make them feel alive.
But alas, Niels made it sound like that, but didn't mean that you need to write a backstory for this character, right? You don't need to write 3 pages for every major NPC you create.
Oh no, that most definitely not.
Because no one wants to do that. At some point, you just don't want to write this stuff. Maybe you do. Maybe do that if you want, because maybe if that works for you, it works. But I don't want to create that. But if you have a personality trait or something, right? The D&D character sheet gives you personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws. All of that stuff can all be summed up as character information. And if you have character information, you can draw from that character information and make reasons up for why that is.
Exactly.
And you don't need anything else from that. So this character has a very big problem with authorities. So maybe he has had a lot of trouble with his parents in his childhood and was never really taught on how to deal with someone that he should obey, listen to, or whatever. And that you can draw, right? Has a problem with authority is a character detail. But then the lore behind that is something different and adds another layer once again.
Yeah. Then, of course, if you have this background already, for whatever reason, you can go the other way around. Go from the backstory to the personal trait.
Draw what that means. So we talked about all kinds of different NPC categories in your thing and how to create them and what they mean and what purpose they have. But there is still something, right? We only talked about NPCs created in prep. And obviously everyone knows the throwaway NPC Boblin the Goblin that suddenly your players come obsessed with because you made the name rhyme. That is an NPC you created on the fly to fill your world. That's a background NPC that suddenly has become a major NPC. I want to talk about throwaway NPCs, right? Creating these characters you create to be thrown away after one session, after their one occurrence, right? We talked about background NPCs and minor NPCs that only come up once or twice, but that was about how you create them in prep. Now it comes to your players go ask you, is there anyone else in the tavern? And you suddenly get flustered and need to create them in the session on the fly. How do you do that?
First, again, these name lists help that we talked about before. You can use them in session as well. It's not just a prep only thing. That just helps to see, okay, those names could be used, this one. And then just use that name for that NPC. Or have these descriptions that you made, the description template. Pick something from that as well. You can use those as well in session. And that might help you. But try to, if you just don't want to deepen that character per se, because it's just a one-off throwaway tavern patron, try to make them as nondescript as possible without making them feel like a amorphous blob.
Make them part of the background, right? And you don't do that through there sits a random weird goblin in the room full of humans. That's not background anymore. That is suddenly focus. So I get to throw in some joke characters as well. I'm not talking about those with throwaway, but if you want to create something, if your players ask you, is there anyone else in the tavern, just can say, first of all, you can say no. That's totally fine. And then it suddenly stops the game from ever running your players going, well, you talk to the other NPC first. That can't happen if there is no other NPC in the tavern. But otherwise, just make them background colorings on the wall. Make them cardboard cutouts that just are there. And you do that not through making them interesting in any way descriptive or in their voice or in their personality that is portrayed. You do that through making them Farmer Bill that is there to drink this evening beer and has had a shit day.
Yeah, and
nothing else.
And in this tavern, there might be 3 Farmer Bills. They might all be called Bill.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. It helps you shift the focus to where you want it to be or where you think your players should be focusing on.
Yeah, I think that thinking of I need to create an NPC that kind of diversifies everything and doesn't make it look like there's just this one ominous NPC that invited my players to the tavern is to make the game feel less railroady. But the only thing you're doing is delay the railroad with the Boblin the Goblin NPC.
Yeah.
You're only delaying that. It's fine to have that ominous NPC that your players need to talk to get the game going. That's fine. Trust me. Sure, you can do something more intricate, but then don't just throw in Boblin the Goblin because you think that will help you, because it probably won't. That is just the thinking of maybe that helps, but it actually doesn't when you think about it. Because you as the player would have done the exact same thing that your players did.
Exactly.
But one thing, I think my last point for today is let your players decide how major an NPC actually becomes. So you have Farmer Bill. Your players talk to Farmer Bill and he gives them directions and your players go that direction and come back and then want to repay Farmer Bill for the help or whatever. And suddenly Farmer Bill becomes more important to your players. Farmer Bill is a connection to the mundane in the world. Your players are heroes fighting dragons to save the continent. Farmer Bill makes 3 copper pieces a day. He has a big farm, he has 2 sheep, and that's it, basically. That's simple, that's easy, but it becomes major because it kind of connects to your players. Now, your players want to connect with him. Then you can make Bill more interesting. You can decide that Bill, after your players have visited Bill a few times, has a sick son, as I said before, that he has maybe a few problems with his neighbor, that his neighbor, and then suddenly you can draw something from that his neighbor is a cultist, and suddenly Bill is very major because he lives next to a cultist or whatever. You can create stuff later on if the NPC becomes more major than you expected.
Yeah.
Then you didn't under-prep that NPC at the beginning. You didn't know your players will care so much. But then you can give back to that and actually let your players' investment in that NPC and interest actually pay off by making that NPC as interesting as your players want them to. If your players just want an interesting Farmer Bill, you don't need to make them more interesting than Farmer Bill. Yeah. But your players need to be the ones deciding how major your NPC becomes at the end. And that you need to figure out. If your players suddenly want this throwaway NPC to become a lot more major than you thought, make them a major NPC, because suddenly they are. Because again, the camera is focused on your players, not where you direct it at.
Exactly. And you can always add more detail later, but once you have or took the time to create the detail, you can't get that back. And that would be my last tip. Try, as with our prep episode or planning episode, try not to over prep or over plan your NPCs, because that can tire you out or cause fatigue in you or in your planning or prepping. And then the NPCs won't feel as good as they could be or should be. But just don't overdo it and everything will be all right, would be my last thing to let the audience know. It's something that you have to feel for yourself, but you will get there. It's a practice thing.
It's a practice thing, as is most things.
Exactly.
So I think with that, we have talked about NPCs enough, about creating them, about making them what you want them to be, about how to create them quickly, about what it means to create an NPC, what we do to create NPCs, and a lot of different stuff about throwaway NPCs as well. I think there will be more episodes on maybe using NPCs and in portraying NPCs and that stuff. But now this was a good baseline for you to actually get thinking on NPC creation, I feel. And with that, Niels, please send us off for today for this episode of DoubleDM.
As per usual, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod. You can visit our website at www.doubledm.com. We also have a Ko-Fi if you would like to donate, but don't feel pressed to do so. Also, please, if you like this show, leave a rating on your favorite podcasting platform of your choice. This really helps the show out. And with that, thanks for listening, and see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.